The role of faith communities is to maintain levels of hope in the community. It's to serve the needs of the community, to ascertain and serve the needs of the community, to maintain worship as best we can, but really faith communities are about serving people and enabling people to live with hope in a time of crisis.
When I'm asked the question about a crisis, I distinguish between an emergency like the present one with COVID, but there are other crises, and I think this is relevant to the Denis Hurley Centre that we are going to be focusing on. The crisis of every day, where people living on the streets, people have no livelihood, people have lost their jobs, lost their homes. That's also a crisis. And certainly the faith community has a role in both those situations.
Faith communities include people of all faiths who earnestly pray, "Out of the depths we cry to you, O God. Hear our prayer."
It is the opportunity to step up to the plate and do what we are supposed to do for what we have been called by the Lord our God. Esther 4 verse 14 says we have been created for a time like this.
Every religion has a duty towards its fellow human being. And in the time of crisis, all religions demand for us to unite and serve humanity, which is the main criteria at that moment.
I think the pandemic allows faith communities the opportunity to live beyond their parochial liturgies, worship, and even their ideas of God, and join together in acts of universal compassion that unites humanity rather than divides us.
To share the resources of our faith community, that we may offer hope and encouragement, that we may together get through this crisis.
I believe and I think, according to what I experience, that the faith community roles is actually to revive hope, to rekindle the charity of our Lord Jesus Christ among the hopeless people, among the hopeless community, and to bring that hope in a broken world as it seems to be.
Here in the United Kingdom, we've had quite a long experience of lockdown, and it's become very evident that our faith communities have a really important role to play. First of all, that people tend to go back to basics in a crisis. And I think that there's been a real need for our faith communities to offer both support, assurance, and of course prayers. But also, the faith communities have been able to witness one another and have really made a very important contribution to social cohesion. And within our faith communities, the ability to draw people together as volunteers and to reach out to meet the needs of others has been something that's been really important.
That means that we have to confront the brutal facts surrounding us clearly and squarely. We should not embrace pessimism, nor should we embrace naive optimism. Instead, we've got to tread a middle path, a path of hope, a path that speaks to us of the faithfulness of God.
To disseminate practical information to the people, especially people who are prone to listen to conspiracy theories and untrustworthy news. The church is an agent of the truth, and it has to communicate the truth.
One of the important dimensions of human beings is the spiritual dimension. By spiritual dimension, I mean faith. So faith at a time of crisis is very important for us. When we are left alone, like during the lockdown here, we were isolated at homes, nobody to talk to. So only God we can talk to during these difficult times. And we pray for Him, we talk to Him, knowing that He is aware of our problems and He's in control and He can help us. So you always, at a time of crisis, we need faith because we get an excellent support through it.
In a crisis, faith communities have a real opportunity to build and generate social capital. It's no longer in a crisis situation about what we believe, but in fact what we can do.
Well, in the time of crisis, we need to be compassionate and alleviate suffering from the poor by providing them relief.
I think faith communities are nimble and can react fast. They're experienced, having managed crises before. And I think importantly, they're present in communities.
Well, all times of crisis unveil for us and bring us really close to the fact that we are vulnerable people. And that can do two things to us. It can make us dissolve into fear and into anger. And the role of faith communities is to remind us that we are not people of fear and anger, that we are people who live within the generosity of God, and that we are not alone, we have each other.
That nothing can be taken for granted, you know. We are here for a purpose other than the normal life that we live. All human beings have to pass through this stage, and some way along the line has to inculcate in him through his community or the community at large that service to humanity is the best work of life.
We've discovered that people are generous in reaching out to others who need their help.
I think partnership and collaboration is key. Alone we can help, but together we can make an impact.
Close contact with vulnerable communities and work with them helps to identify quickly, again, the pressing needs and respond rapidly to meet these needs. I think this was very clearly revealed by DHC when it was able to respond to the needs of homeless people in particular, with whom they have been working over some years.
It is all about networks, because without networks we can't do anything. We can't handle a crisis of this magnitude on your own, as individuals or as faith communities or as organizations on your own. This has shown that we need one another. Together, we can do so much more.
Things are going to be very different as we emerge from this pandemic, and we will need to be flexible and agile in adapting new methods to maintain our mission of speaking the good news to our world.
A crisis brings out the worst in people, and we've seen the worst of it in our own country, but it certainly brings out the best in people. And the faith communities have a responsibility to encourage the best from civil society and from our congregations in order to support one another and to stand together.
There are so many lessons that we have learned in this COVID crisis about ourselves, the way that we react to hardships, and the way the community reacts to hardships, how the government has reacted to hardship, sometimes in good ways and sometimes in really not very good ways.
Despite all the challenges which we've faced and the real heartache that people have experienced, particularly through bereavement and illness and insecurity about work, we've actually, I think, maybe because of those things, we've had it reinforce what it is to be a neighbour. And that's sometimes the people who live near us in adjacent properties, but it's also the people that we can contact and communicate with. So the use of social media has been really important. But I think just the awareness that somebody who lives next door to me may be in need.
So it's time now to learn a big lesson, to show respect and to live in peace and in harmony with the environment around us.
I think COVID has taught us that humanity has become arrogant, and if it doesn't stop doing what it's doing to the environment, well, humanity will perish. So if we want to continue to live on this beautiful planet, we need to learn to start taking much better care of it.
Look, if we look at human beings, we'll see that every one of us are equal in status in the eyes of God. And no matter how much of finances we have, whether we are homeless or whether we have got a lot of finances, but we are equal.
I think myself, the first thing I've learned is our vulnerability. You know, it's not easy to admit that you're vulnerable.
We are too small before God, but I've also learned that we can only cope if we bring our effort together. If we put hands together, if we live as brothers and sisters. I think the encyclical of Pope Francis, our Holy Father, comes at the appropriate time, Fratelli Tutti, to become brothers, to care for one another, and care becomes that paradigm that will bring back healing into the communities.
The pandemic has been more than just about a virus. It has been like a magnifying glass that has revealed our inherent fracturedness in our human society. The fractures that we carry with race, with gender, with LGBTIA people, the fractures that we have with nature and creation, and our role as humanity within that. And so the pandemic has shown me that we have not actually progressed past these fractures. Instead, they plague us, and they plague how we talk about the pandemic, how we put in interventions against the pandemic, but they are part of who we are. And if anything, this pandemic has kind of reminded me that we have to deal with these fractures, because if we don't do that, we won't move beyond it. We have to deal with the fact that we don't treat creation with respect.
The lessons that we have learned is probably, it is not so much new lessons, but lessons which show the fractures within society. One of the main fractures, of course, is the difference between the rich and the poor. It is clear that there's this huge gap between the rich countries and the poor countries, typified immediately nowadays by the availability of vaccines.
We've learned to slow down, because to be aware of how frail and vulnerable we are. And we need to support each other, spiritually, emotionally, psychologically, physically.
We've learned many lessons. The most important lesson is that anything can happen anytime, and we need to have faith and be prepared to be able to help in every way that we possibly can.
You know, as a person of color, Denis Hurley as a person had a huge impact on the way we saw ourselves, on the way we saw society, and on the way we saw what society was imposing on us, mainly the political society was imposing on us. And the way he stood up for those who were being oppressed, that was one of the greatest things for me, Denis Hurley. That's the figure I have in my mind all the time. Denis Hurley, the one taking up the cause of the underdog.
It's something of a privilege for me to be a patron of the Denis Hurley Association here in the United Kingdom. I find that the story of Archbishop Denis Hurley and his legacy is inspiring.
I'm a man of humanity, and the principles and ideals of Denis Hurley himself and the Denis Hurley Centre is very, very embodied in my heart. And I serve Denis Hurley, I support it, and I work with Denis Hurley Centre because we share the same ideals and principles.
Denis Hurley Centre is a creative and well-run organisation. It's like an anchor in our harbour city. They show compassion and practical care, but also lobby for better conditions, a change of systems that keep people hungry and homeless.
The Denis Hurley Centre is a beacon of light and inspiration in our town.
I support the Denis Hurley Centre because of all the wonderful programs they do, especially helping the homeless, not just finding shelter and food, but also uplifting them and even getting them to come back to normal lives.
One thing that has impressed me the most was last year when lockdown was announced and the homeless people were properly accommodated with the dignity that they deserve, which was in stark contrast to what happened in many other South African centres in the way that the homeless people were treated.
I believe that the Denis Hurley Centre provides us with a place, a space, to go out to the peripheries, to dialogue and interact with those on the peripheries, to meet them where they're at and to respond in a Christ-like way to their need.
I believe that the Denis Hurley Centre does concrete work towards enhancing the lives of the deprived and the poor, and it does it with compassion and love. And I think that those are the most important aspects of work with communities.
It's like you asking somebody, why do you support the poor? Why do you have to take care of the poor? Mother Teresa was asked this question at her time, on time. Why do you think what you're doing can make a difference? The Denis Hurley Centre is the heart, the core of the Catholic charity in our archdiocese.
The centre does a huge amount of good for the poor and the marginalised, and that is simply the gospel. And the need for support of the centre is quite clear.
I think Denis Hurley Centre gives us a true example of the church walking where Jesus walked and bringing real good news to the least. Not just a sandwich and a clinic to heal wounds, but they restore dignity and belonging back to people. And that is where the real human healing happens.
The ecumenical element is important because the churches belong together. And if we want to bear witness to the world and make the fact that we follow God in the way of Jesus attractive, we do that way better if we're working together than if we're in our little corners sniping at each other.
One is that it gives us a practical way of doing mission. So we can contribute to things like food banks and clothing and book supplies. And that's really good. It's a very practical way. The other way is that the Denis Hurley Centre provides a channel and a voice that can talk to the systems of our local government and the eThekwini municipality. So we can address business forums and we can address politicians in a way that challenges why homelessness is a continual issue in our community.
Well, they're organized and run well. They have an undeniable long track record. I love their heart, and they're easy and fun to work with, and look forward to partnering in the future.
I like the Denis Hurley Centre because I like the people working there. They are people that speak the same language and has the same passion that I have. They're my friends, and together we learn so much from one another.
The local people serve the centre in love, but there are those of us who are outside the country, are privileged to be able to connect with and offer ongoing support to this loving and compassionate ministry.
You must be clear on your principles, and when the occasion arises, you stand up for those principles and declare them. And if necessary, you stand out like a sore thumb. That for me is how I would see the function of the Denis Hurley Centre. We're in a city where, everything goes, things are not going right. We could easily get into a very mediocre state of thinking and action. And yet I believe what the Denis Hurley Centre stands for is those principles. Every human being has a dignity that we have to affirm. If they've lost it, we must restore it. And when they've got it back, we must affirm it and make sure that they in turn do the same with others.